The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you, and enjoy. Tonight, I'd like to talk about a topic which is a real doorway to insight and to transformation. And it's about your relationship with death. So, of course, before we dive into that, a couple of jokes. A woman called the florist to order some flowers for her lover's funeral. And the woman was caught off guard when she was asked, well, what message do you want on the card? She said, message? And she said, well, I guess you'll be missed. So she went to the funeral home, and she was pleased that her floral tribute looked so beautiful. But then she looked at the card, and it said, I guess you will be missed. I got a million death jokes. I have to run one more by you. A man is struck on by a bus on a busy street. He's lying near death on the sidewalk as the crowd gathers. A priest, somebody get me a priest. A policeman checks the crowd and yells, a priest, please. Out of the crowd steps a little old man, at least 80 years old. Mr. Policeman, says the man, I'm not a priest. I'm not even a Christian. But for 50 years now, I'm living behind the Catholic Church on First Avenue. And every night I'm hearing their services, and I can recall a lot of it, and maybe that would be some comfort to this man. So the policeman agrees. He clears the crowd so the man can get through to where this injured man is lying. He kneels down and he leads over in a very solemn voice. He says, B4, I-19, N38, G54. So, okay. So death can obviously be it can be an absurd and a pretty morose topic. But the truth is that coming into deeper understanding of death and your relationship with death is integral to being alive, fully alive. So I'd like to talk in this little bit of time we have first about the fragility of the body, about the Buddha's last words when he died, and the power of reflecting on death as a practice, and some thoughts on what it's like to be with others who are dying, and how remembering death can be an incredibly powerful part of your practice. When I got my first job at a grad school, I was teaching in a high school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the first thing I did was sell my car and buy a motorcycle. And I was up in the Northeast Heights, just sitting at a stoplight, when a car went by me on the right about 60 miles an hour, right through the red light. I just saw that, and I kind of continued on. At the next stoplight, again, I was stopped, and a car pulled up to me, and the window came down, and someone said, you have no idea what happened, do you? I said, what? He said, well, the woman in that truck was obviously drunk, and she was passing us going about 65 miles an hour, and she was in your lane. And just before she hit you, she changed lanes and went through the red light. You came this close to being obliterated. And it was quite interesting just to hear that in a conversation on the street. And And so as I drove on, I thought, wow, I really want to remember this moment, how fragile this is. And of course, I forgot about it almost immediately. I kind of went back into the trance of my life. And I imagine you have had moments of seeing the fragility of life, seeing how quickly it can be snuffed out. Or maybe someone you know who's close to you who has died and has triggered a very deep state of grieving, a great awakening around what's important in your life, and it fades over time. So much of the practice is about remembering the fragility of life. So from the perspective of Buddhism or Buddhist psychology, there are just a couple of things to keep in mind. The first is that death is certain. Of everyone alive on the planet right now, almost none of us will be alive in 100 years. Everyone will be gone. The second point is that you are dying from the moment you were born. In some traditions, when there is a birth, there's a celebration, but there's also an acknowledgement of grieving. That this being who's come into form is going to fall away again. The second point to remember is that death comes in a moment, and its time is unexpected. Between you and death is one breath. The next point is that the duration of your life is uncertain. The young can die before the old. The healthy can die before the sick. The next point is that there are many ways you can die, and there are not that many ways that sustain life. Even the things that can sustain you can kill you. Food, cars, blenders. Maybe not blenders, but there are a lot of things that can kill you out there that are inherently designed to support you. And the next point is that your body is inherently fragile. Microbes, viruses, the smallest things can result in your body no longer being here. So the only thing that can help you at the time of your death is your mental and your spiritual development. Money and power can't help you. Friends and relatives can't help you. The body isn't much help. For most of us, at the end, the body is just a husk. So, what's the way through this? So the Buddha was reportedly born in 623 BC. There's not a whole lot that's known about the specifics of the Buddha's life. A lot of it is handed down through oral tradition. But he died at about the age of 80, of old age, a very, very full life. And it's very interesting that at the time of his death, again, reportedly, his final words to all of those who were around him was a very conscious death. Again, supposedly he was surrounded by his students. And this is what he said, his dying words. This is my advice to you. All component things in the world are changeable. They are not lasting. Work hard to gain your own salvation. Others also suggested that he said, be a lamp unto yourself. Follow no teacher. Follow Be a lamp unto yourself. Be a light unto yourself. So what he's saying is, remember impermanence. All component things in this world are changeable. This life is in constant flux. It's here, and it's gone, and it's not dependable. Empower yourself in your journey. It's an interesting thing around final words. There's a whole tradition in Zen, in Japan, with the Japanese death poems. Consciousness of death in life is a big part of a lot of spiritual traditions, and very true in Japan, where the death poem is sort of like the last thing you write before the lights go out. So here are a few death poems. And a lot of these are from like around in the 1400s, from the samurai, the literate. Not even for a moment do things stand still. Witness color in the trees. This one's kind of cool. Bury me when I die beneath a wine barrel in a tavern. With luck, the cask will leak. And one of the most famous from Basho at the end of his life. On a journey, ill, my dream goes wandering over withered fields. And then one more. Had I not known that I was dead already, I would have mourned my loss of life. So these Japanese death poems are the final words before you go out. Your final statement of the mystery. And it is a mystery as to what's next. There are many different theories, and all different traditions have their own culture around death and what's next. In some, it's a final resting place. It's a place where you're surrounded by your friends or with with the deity of your choice. And there's some very interesting theories as to reincarnation. And reincarnation is kind of a little bit suppressed in this culture, but the truth is the Buddha talked about reincarnation as part of a reality, that there is something that continues in its journey. Many, many years ago, I was traveling. I had a motorhome and traveled for 3 years teaching around North America. And I was staying with some friends outside of Chicago. And I went to use the bathroom about 2 a.m. and I didn't realize there was a step down into the bathroom. And I fell and I hit my head and had a concussion. And for years I've been dragging around the book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche. And literally as I lifted the cabinet in the motorhome, it fell into my hands. And it's a fascinating read into a perspective. This is from the Tibetan tradition, which is unique unto itself, on how to prepare for your death. So much around living your life is to prepare for the end so that you are clear and present for it. But it's also a fascinating angle from the Tibetan perspective of what happens when you transition from physical form into whatever's next. And they describe it as in terms of the 4 elements. And there are stages that you go through. The first is the earth element changes. Your body becomes thin. You lose the luster. And then the water element, the fluids dry up. And then you lose awareness of feelings in relationship to thought. And then the fire element begins to go out. Your digestion stops. Your weakness increases. And then the wind element, the air element, where you lose your ability to move and taste falls away. And then they describe how there's a central channel above the heart and the top of the head that starts to open. And then an opening at the base of the spine. And then an opening of the heart. And then a dissolving into the subtle winds. I watched my father die, and the hospice nurse, showed me just physiologically what was happening as he was transitioning, of how just the intelligence of the life force, that it begins to abandon the limbs. And then you can see kind of a blue-gray come into the feet and the hands, because the life force is working to preserve the very, very core. And really kind of the last place where it gives up is the lungs and the heart. There's a great story of a student of Zen who went to his Zen master and said, Master, can you tell me what happens after I die? And the master said, I have no idea. And the student said, but you're a Zen master. And he replied, yes, but I'm not a dead one. Meditation has been described in essence as dying while alive. That when you sit down to be present, when you sit down to cultivate non-judging awareness, that all these fleeting thoughts come, all these stories come. I'm going to do this tomorrow. I was hurt by this a year ago. And you come, when you notice it, when you come back to the present moment, you are letting go. You're disassociating with that story. And of course, as a result, when you practice that long enough, you begin to you believe your thoughts less. That your capacity to be aware without judgment gets stronger and stronger. Your capacity to be this compassionate, caring observer begins to get stronger the more you practice. And of course, that takes you immediately into your capacity to be present at the end of your life. It's been a while now, maybe 20 years or so, I had a very close near-death experience. I was out hiking. I was barefoot, walking with a friend in the mountains of western Massachusetts where I lived, and I was stung by a honeybee. And it didn't seem like a big deal. I just, stopped and pulled out the stinger. I didn't realize till later that I'd actually inadvertently squeezed the bulb of the stinger and injected it into me. But we kept on walking, and after about a half-hour walk, I noticed I was getting very, very flushed. And we kind of made our way. We walked down to, this is at Kripalu Center in the Berkshires, and we were down at the lake, and someone saw me and said, are you okay? You want to ride back? And I was kind of embarrassed. I said, no, I'm okay. But for some reason, this person insisted. And so we went back up, and by that time, I was very, very flushed and finding it kind of a little bit hard to breathe. And a friend of mine in the ashram was on medical staff. He'd been a medic in Vietnam. And he just happened to be walking by. And he looked at me, and I told him what happened. He said, get in the car right now. So I was going into anaphylactic shock, where my system was kind of unable to identify the toxin, so it was just sort of turning on itself. And I got to watch this very interesting shift in consciousness as we were driving to the hospital. first I thought, oh gosh, I may really be, I'm going out here. Because my Mukesh kept saying, can you breathe? How's your breath? And so as we're driving, I thought, well, maybe I should do some chanting or something like that. And so I started doing some chanting, and suddenly I felt worse. I thought, oh, screw that. I'm not going to do that anymore. But then suddenly I noticed that time began to get very, very interesting. First, I noticed I could remember some faces, but I couldn't put any names to the faces of people that I was remembering. And then at one point, I remember we were coming up on an intersection, and this was in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, in a kind of a small city. And I was just noticing this woman standing on the street corner, and very, very slowly her hand was just coming up to brush her hair away from her face in super slow motion. And I looked over to the speedometer, and we were going 90 miles an hour. And it was suddenly, I realized things are really getting both fast and slow, really moving outside of time. By the time we pulled into the parking lot, I remember my last thought was, why do we have to do this touchy-feely stuff all the time? Like, why does Mukesh have to have his arm around me? And I realized, oh, I'm not walking. He was dragging me into the emergency room. And then suddenly I was on the ceiling looking down on four people working on my body. And I remember exactly what they were calling out. So I want those IVs wide open, and calling out blood pressure. And I was just seeing it quite objectively. I remember thinking to myself, this is just a slab of meat here on the table. And I thought, there's no way they're ever going to get this body back unless it's God's will or something. And then right then, it was like I fell from the ceiling onto the table. And then I heard the doctor's voice in my ear saying, he's back, we got him. The ensuing days were very disorienting because I still sort of had access to that very ephemeral place where on some level nothing made any sense. There was a level of depression, but at the same time I could be intensely present. And over time I began to realize that presence was what it was all about. And I found myself, as many people do after a near-death experience, having a real sense of urgency, a sense of recognizing there is so little time. This life is a flash of lightning that can end in any moment. And I found it to very powerfully deepen my practice. And then I kind of forgot about it, as usually happens. As a great yogi once said, the greatest wonder in the world is that everyone dies. And the second greatest wonder in the world is that no one thinks they will. We just slip out of that. And somehow we believe that all of this is permanent, that nothing's going to change. And so it really behooves us in our practice to get familiar with death, not to turn away from it. And as you age, you'll have the opportunity to experience more death around you. You might be like my mother-in-law, who outlived all of her friends. So getting familiar with death is getting familiar with a law of reality. The Buddha said of the heavenly messengers that when you're visited by the heavenly messengers, if you truly invite them in, they will transform your life. And the heavenly messengers are sickness, old age, and death. Reminding yourself that you have not gone beyond sickness, you have not gone beyond aging, and you have not gone beyond death. So there can be tremendous power if you have the opportunity to accompany someone through their transition. Someone wrote me who's not here tonight, anticipating this talk, and she's a nurse, and she said, of my entire nursing career, the richest thing I have done is to be a hospice nurse. And I know those who volunteered in hospice find it to be incredibly powerful. Part of death, of course, is grieving. And acknowledging and grieving fully is part of life as well. As Khalil Gibran said, unless you grieve fully, you will laugh, but not all your laughter, and you'll cry, but not all your tears. So it's a balance of grieving fully and yet not turning away from the reality of death. There's a classic story, which you may have heard, of a woman who lost her infant son and demanded to see the Buddha and demanded that he bring her son back to life. She said, you're a great teacher, you're a master, do this for me. And he said, I will do this for you. If you can find a household where death has not come and bring back a mustard seed from that household, I will bring your son back. So with all of her hope and all of her intensity, she went out to seek and find a household where death had not come. And of course, she began to see that no one is untouched. No household is not touched by death. So when she came back, it was not only with a very clear sense of wisdom, but a very powerful sense of compassion as well for this shared experience that we have. So if death is a fact, how can you use the fact of death to get the most that you can out of this life? Carlos Castaneda has a great teaching about this. He says, death is the only wise advisor that you have. Whatever you feel, as you always do, that everything is going wrong and you're about to be annihilated, turn to your death and ask if that is so. Your death will tell you that you're wrong, that nothing really matters outside its touch. Your death will tell you, I haven't touched you yet. So he went on to say that you must always keep death on your left shoulder. Keep death as an advisor on your left shoulder. So I thought we might do a little reflection here, if you like. If you'd like, you can close your eyes. And you might deepen your breath. And take a moment to sense what might relax or soften right now. When you reflect on this time in your life, of your relationships, your commitments, your responsibilities. If you could imagine death sitting on your left shoulder, what advice might it offer you in your life right now? And then gently deepening the breath. And letting your eyes open. Someone who worked in hospice for their career, who spent countless hours talking with people on their deathbed, would ask, what is your greatest regret? The number one regret of the dying is, I wasn't true to myself. And remembering how short this life is, with no guarantee of how long you have, can be a very powerful invitation to explore really what it means to be true to yourself. So there are many, many different meditations on death. In both the Buddhist tradition and in the yogic tradition, the early tantric practitioners would meditate on burning corpses, just as a way to really burn in that realization, to recognize intimately how the body is destined to fall away. There's another practice that I have found myself doing, and my wife as well. We were talking about this earlier today. And I oftentimes do this when I'm kayaking on the river. I paddle hard upriver, and then oftentimes I just float down and do kind of an open-eyed meditation. I just sort of imagine, what is this moment without me? If my body was not here, what would this moment be like? So maybe we can try that just for a minute or two. Again, with the eyes closed. As you feel the breath. And take a moment to familiarize yourself with the space of this room, with the sounds around you. What would this moment be without you? Another reflection, which I sometimes will do in meditation, I'll just offer these words. Imagine who you are in the absence of sight. Imagine who you are with the absence of smell. Imagine who you are with the absence of taste. Imagine who you are in the absence of touch. Can you imagine a quality of presence that is beyond your body, beyond the linear mind? Outside of time, connected to everything. And as you're ready again, you can deepen the breath. If you like, you can open the eyes or remain with them closed. So many traditions point toward the moment of death as a critical part of your journey, and how a well-lived life is a preparation. So how do you best prepare for your transition? Well, it's pretty simple. Behave in a manner in which you believe is responsible and good and positive toward yourself and others. This leads to a sense of calmness, to a sense of happiness. And that sense of calm and happiness contributes to a calm and collected mind at the time of your transition. A life of no regret allows you to surrender without struggle into a state of grace. Whatever it is that comes after this. So again, in meditation, we speak of the two wings. To be aware, to be alert, to be open, and to be fully here. Ultimately, it comes to an open mind and an open heart, and living your life in a way that at the end you are calm and open and centered. There's a wonderful quote that says, "Resolve to be tender with the young, compassionate with the aged, sympathetic with the striving, tolerant of the weak and the wrong. Because sometime in your life you will have been all of these." This is truly speaks of the path of the Bodhisattva, to have an awakened heart and to be as best as you can awake to the mystery with both wisdom and joy. I've got a couple more death jokes, but I'll save them for another time. Thank you for your presence. There's something very powerful about, and what death represents truly is back to those words of the Buddha, that this life is changing. It is not dependable. And to hold that in your attention. When you recognize that, new possibilities open where they did not before. Just a reminder, as we transition, one of the great ways to celebrate life is with tea and cookies. And you might particularly savor your cookies tonight. There's a mindful discussion group happening in the boardroom right over here. If you haven't checked that out, it's great. And if you'd like to be on the mailing list, please do sign up on the back. And thank you, as always, for your support for the church and me and all of that. So enjoy your precious life tonight. I'll see you next week. Thank you.